So this sunspot scared me quite a bit over the past week and a half or so. If that seems like a strange thing to be anxious about, I'll confess that it is, I suppose, and feels a bit awkward to get online and talk about your more obscure anxieties. And I can even understand if some of you are inclined to mock a bit and say, look, I've got enough problems here on Earth, let alone needing to worry about anything on the sun. I get it. But I do hope that I can maybe use this as an opportunity to explain a bit of my thought and a bit of my rationale about some events, or about how I have come to view some of the more cataclysmic passages in Scripture, both prior ones, the flood in particular, but also potential future ones as well. Thinking in particular of some of the end times type prophetic verses that we find in books like Daniel and Revelation. If that seems like it's a out of left field view, it is, which means that it'll take a bit of groundwork for me to start to explain kind of how I've come to view some of those passages and why I think that watching something like this would make any sense in the context of some of those passages. And so, since it was top of mind for me here over the past week, maybe this is a good place to start having some of those discussions and again laying some of that groundwork for how I've come to view some of those passages and kind of the lens that I'm using to go and interpret them going forward. So let's talk about what was it about this group of sunspots that made it particularly a bit scary. The sun, as you may know, goes through an 11-year cycle where the number of sunspots ebbs and flows, and it has a maximum and a minimum. And from trough to trough, or from peak to peak, is just about 11 years. And we're coming off of the current peak now, so we're right about at peak sunspot count, but we're a little bit past the absolute maximum probably. So the numbers are starting to go down. They'll get to a minimum by about 2030, and then kind of climb their way back up to another maximum around 2035 or so. And when the number of sunspots is high, there's also a potential for associated solar flares. So the magnetic field around the sunspots, when you have a group of them, can get kind of twisted and convoluted, and as some of that gets released, if you will, it has the potential to go and send material towards Earth. Now, if it's an 11-year cycle, well then, hasn't this happened scores of times before, and shouldn't that be reason to not be too afraid? Yes and no. So on the one hand, the longer-term trend that should give reason for pause is that there's good reason to believe that the Earth's magnetic field is weakening at a conspicuously high rate. And we're not going to get into all the rationale for that today. We can get into it at another time, but the protection that we get from the magnetic field is likely less now than it was 10 years ago, and less than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. The second reason is that the larger the group of sunspots and the more complex or twisted or kind of knotted, if you will, the group, the greater their potential to have an eruptive coronal mass ejection event. And while this group wasn't the most complex one that we've ever seen, it was pretty big. And if you look at this diagram here, this is credit to Ben Davidson for doing this illustration. This is a comparison size-wise of this current group as it was about a week and a half ago to the one which caused what's known as the Carrington event, which was in 1859, and that's the it was associated with the biggest solar flare that's hit Earth in recorded history. And again, obviously, it's not an exact one-to-one correlation. There are things beyond simply the size that matter. The complexity of it matters a lot, and this was not as kind of gnarled and marbled and complex, if you will, as that group was, but it was a conspicuously large one. And so the combination of having a generally reduced magnetic field plus an exceptionally large sunspot, those two gave me a fair bit of pause. At any rate, that is some of the rationale behind, again, one of my more obscure anxieties. And in this case, I'm grateful to God that nothing came of it. I'm happy that there was no ill effects from it. But as I look at some of the cataclysmic passages in Scripture, I'm beginning to wonder if the interplay of forces coming from the sun to the earth through our magnetic field might not be a factor in both what we read in the flood account as well as in some of the other passages like in Revelation and in Daniel that describe future cataclysms. And we'll get into the detail more, but wanted to lay a bit of the groundwork here today.